Brilliant.
Perfect. All right, this is going to be a complete change of tone, and I've only got 5 minutes, so it's going to be whistle stop as well. So hi everyone, my name is Hurry, and that's like when you go somewhere quickly, you're in a hurry. I am a research application manager at the Turing Institute and also a co-chair of the UK TRE Community. I'm just going to tell you guys a bit whistle-stop tour of who we are, why we exist, what we're trying to do, and where we're going. So I find it's often helpful to think about why we exist in the context of the challenges and aims of the UK TRE landscape as a whole. And there are a number of big challenges in the space. Firstly, TREs, these trusted research environments, are very hard. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different people involved. How can we make it as easy as possible for teams across the country to build and provision this infrastructure? This is paired with the fact that they're also really important. It's no secret that the future of sensitive data research in the UK and beyond is going to require the use of TREs. So it's not just how can we make it easy to provide them, but how can we make them as impactful and useful as possible. Also, TRE teams struggle with a lot of the same problems and have siloed conversations about the same issues. Can we have shared conversations in shared spaces and solve problems together? And also, there's a limited shared understanding of what a TRE is. You may have heard of secure research environment, secure development environment, data safe haven. How can we know what good looks like if we don't even know what we're building in the first place? And we think a lot of these challenges can be resolved with a UK TRE community, a place for people to come together to do things like share knowledge and share best practice on what good looks like, to foster collaboration, avoid duplicating work and share solutions together, and also move towards a shared understanding of what we're trying to build. In the context of aims across the TRE landscape, there'd be a number of things that'd be great to see. Wouldn't it be great to see federation so that core functionality can be distributed across a network of connected institutions working together? Wouldn't it be great to see the tools and methods being used in organization X interoperable with those being used at organization Y? Wouldn't it be great to have a shared benchmark of a TRE framework we can all adhere to across the UK and beyond? Wouldn't it be great for collaborative research projects to become the norm across institutions because they're so easy to set up and the impact is well understood? And wouldn't it be great to have national solutions to some of these shared problems? Hopefully that all sounds great. You might see where this is going. This would all require us to work together, and to work together, we might need a UK TRE community. So this is kind of why we set ourselves up, and we have a vision as a community to have a 4 nations coordinated, collaborative approach to research infrastructure for working with sensitive data. Importantly, sensitive data is not just health data. It can also be like administrative data, census data, financial data, commercially sensitive data, anything that could be considered sensitive. And yeah, our mission is to provide the space to signpost, share knowledge, and facilitate conversations across the UK TRE landscape. The key thing here is we don't have a directive as a community. We're trying to provide the space, and we are driven by community needs. So we want the community to come together to our meetings and events, prioritize what are the most important issues in the space at the moment, and then work on those rather than being driven by a select few in the community. Very brief history. We started at September 2022, the day before RSECon. Simon Lee from the University of Dundee and Health Informatics Centre set up a meeting for about 30 of us to come together and talk about TREs. We wrote a manifesto, committed to continue meeting. Our 1-year anniversary, just before RSECon in September 2023, we had what we think was the biggest meet-up of people working or interested in TREs in the UK to date, with over 150 attendees, some I can see in the room, both in person and online. And as of today, we have around 250 members engaged with the community from across academia, industry, government, healthcare, and more. Where we are right now, we got awarded a community grant from TRE UK in November to help build out the community, and with this grant we're focusing on 3 main things. So firstly, strengthening the community. We had quite a haphazard, chaotic grassroots start, and now we're formalizing our governance processes, decision-making processes, how you can get involved, and also a framework for different groups and organizations across the country to come together to work on research outputs collaboratively. Also enhancing outreach and engagement. A community is obviously not a community if the people who should be there aren't there. So making sure we're working with organizations and people who want to be involved in the community and engaging them, that is especially important when it comes to public engagement, so working with public organizations to ensure that the public voice is a strong voice within the community. And also developing a resource hub. So we want uktre.org to be a central hub for resources in the country, so people working in this space can openly share resources with anybody interested, and we can collectively improve the UK's capacity for working with sensitive data for research purposes. I've got 5 seconds, so thank you TRE Community UK and Scriberia. And also, our next event is on Thursday, so if you want to scan the QR code next week, please join. It's online and free.
So now on to Caroline.
Thank you. So I'm here today on behalf of the Software Sustainability Institute. And the Software Sustainability Institute, or SSI, which is slightly less of a mouthful, is an institute which is dedicated to supporting people, the important human infrastructure of those of us who write software for research. So many of us now write more software than we do papers, contributing to papers, of course, but focusing our time writing code. So the SSI has been working for many years now, 13 coming up to, providing a fellowship program, training, also looking at things like policy, doing applied research in the area. So I'm the research director and I oversee that program, looking at all aspects of how we write software for research so that we can make sure we support the people who do it better. And so in the time that we have today, what I wanted to do, and I'll be honest with you, right, this is a time of reflection for us because we have our interview tomorrow for our 4th phase of funding, which is going to take us over the next 4 years. And so we're thinking about, what have we been doing so far? What do we need to be doing in the future? So in particular, I'm thinking today about what qualities we want to see in research software. Because whilst I don't think they will have changed in terms of how we want software to behave, I think the way we write software is going to change really significantly over the next few years. Okay, so what qualities do we want to see? So I've got a few here. These are not exhaustive. There are lots of qualities that we might want to see in our software. But I think, particularly from the perspective of research, robustness is important. The software behaves as we expect it to, does that reliably, gives us the outputs that we expect. We also want it to be explainable, and it's really interesting because explainable is usually used these days in relation to black box machine learning, right? And this is very sensible. But actually, I think we don't think enough about how explainable our own code is because it gets very complex very quickly. And we want end users, whether that's us or whether that's somebody else using our code, to be able to understand where our results have come from. I think that's quite important for science. We also want other people to be able to use our code and to be able to build on our methods. So can other researchers, developers, understand and build on what we've done? So we want it to be explainable. And finally, I've included sustainable for a couple of reasons. So firstly, we want our software to continue working, and this is previously how we used the term sustainable. But we also more and more are thinking about it being resource efficient as well. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because our data are getting bigger, our software is getting more complex, but also the way in which we write software is going to have environmental implications as well. Thinking about things like generative AI, that's a spoiler for later on. Okay, so let's say, this is how we want our software to behave. What skills do we need software engineers to have at the moment? So I've listed a few here. These are the kinds of things that at the SSI we support people in, right? So we provide training in these areas and we champion people and, we have our fellows who go out into the community to raise awareness of these things. So we've got things like software architecture. Can we sensibly modularize our code, for example? Version control. So ideally, we want to be, putting it into GitHub, and we've got provenance of the changes. We know which version we use for particular analysis. Documentation. This is helpful, obviously, for helping other people understand what we've done, but also for us when we come back to it again. And also things like code review. Can we understand other people's code? Can we support them in making it better? Can we help people with maintaining code, making sure it remains secure, making sure it's updated? And I've also added automated testing as well, because I think this is particularly important as our software becomes more complex. It's quite easy to not worry about testing when we've got something that's very straightforward, but more and more making sure that we've got those checks in, that, you know, to check that our software is working as we expect, I think is going to be important. Okay, so what's changed then? Well, we have generative AI now that can help us write software. And this means writing software is getting much easier, okay? So I use this term advisedly. It appears to be getting easier. I think ultimately there are still going to be sort of major challenges there in terms of making sure that we're writing the right software. But it does appear to be getting easier, right? It's becoming much more accessible to people. And that means, as we're able to do it more quickly, and we're involving other tools in producing software, complexity is going up, and explainability is going down. So as something becomes more complex, it's just more difficult to explain. So this relationship's been there for a long time. So I'm a mixed methods researcher, and I do research into software engineering. I also do research into the relationship between health and technology. And one of the things that I like to do as part of my research is a bit of autoethnography. So this means essentially immersing yourself in a particular practice, doing it yourself in order to understand it better. So of course, I've had a go at using ChatGPT for writing code, and recently I was doing this with a VB macro for Excel. So I had some interview shortlisting to do, and I had like 150 candidates. It was very challenging. And anyway, I wanted to colour in some of the cells according to their value, right? So I thought, oh no, this is a perfect opportunity. I'll try using ChatGPT to write one of these macros. So I did, and it was really quick, and I got it going really quickly, but it needed debugging. Okay, so it didn't work quite as I was expecting it to straight away. So my husband is a research software engineer, and he happened to be passing by my office door at the time that I was doing this. So I said, oh, well, could you just come and have a quick look at this? This thing isn't working. Anyway, what followed was what I'll describe as a relatively fraught pair programming session. Not sure I recommend doing this with your spouse. But the thing that was really interesting to me is he's a software engineer and I'm a researcher, essentially, right? So we both work in research, but that's where our kind of our skills lie. And his approach and my approach were quite different. So he was wanting to understand the code, this explainability thing that I've been talking about that's so important. And my approach was that I don't have time to understand the code, I just want to get this thing done, right? And so I was hypothesizing about why it was going wrong and then testing it. And he would like me to say at this point that his approach was the right one. I'm not going to disagree with him about that. He's the expert. But I thought it was really interesting. It was really interesting because these different perspectives, this perspective of the expert who really understands the code, and I think Piers was talking about this a little bit yesterday, actually, in his talk. These experts that really understand the code, and then people like me who essentially want to get a job done aren't going to be able to understand the code in the same way, so we need to do something else. Okay, so what does this mean then for the skills that we need to engineer research software in the future? So I think we need to develop our ability to interrogate code, right, to understand its strengths and weaknesses. I think we need to remain skeptical or become more skeptical about technology. I should put that at the top. I think it's probably the most important one, to not trust what's in front of you straight away. We need critical thinking. We need to be able to hypothesize about what the code is doing and test it. We need to be able to empirically observe its behavior. So the good news, I think, for those of us here today, is that you will be familiar with a lot of these skills already. You know, they're very relevant to the scientific method that we apply to lots of our research on a daily basis. So I think what this means is that whilst nobody really knows what the future holds, so I say, what skills do we need in the future? Well, we're really bad at predicting the future, okay, so I don't know for sure. Nobody really knows what skills we need in the future. But I reckon that this comes close to some of the things that are going to start to be more important when we're writing our software. And whilst, again, I don't know what that means for society at large in terms of how software is going to be written, I do actually think that within the research community, we're in a really good place for dealing with this new world, because we already have the skills we're going to need to deal with the technology that is going to create it. And with that, I will finish.
I'd like to introduce Matt, who is the president of the Society of Software Engineers.
Thank you very much. I'll just, introduce myself. So my name is Matt Williams, and I'm... that's not the right slides either. Mine are purple, if that helps. There we go. Or I don't know what colour that is, a plum of some kind. So my name is Matt Williams. I'm the president of the Society of Research Software Engineering, which sort of, I think, inevitably leads to two questions. What do the Society of Research Software Engineering do? But before that, I think, what even is research software engineering? It's a term that's been sort of dropped throughout the sessions that I've been in, talking about RSEs, or research software engineers, or research software engineering more widely. And I think it's the sort of discipline or the sort of idea which has so many different definitions depending on who you ask. If you ask one person or another person, you're going to get completely different answers. But to me, at its core, it's the idea of taking these industrial, professional software development practices, the kind of things that Carole and I were just talking about there, and finding ways to apply it in a research context. Now, this came out of originally largely universities, where there were postdocs who were being hired to write papers and being measured on how many papers and talks they could give. What they were being told to do in their day job and the work they were actually doing day on, day out was programming and software development. And those two sort of things clash a little bit. So a sort of, just over 10 years or so ago, there was an event actually being run by the Software Sustainability Institute, SSI, to sort of come together and work out how we can solve this problem. And this idea of having a career progression path for research software engineers came about, but also a greater understanding of what we consider to be research software engineering itself. And so one of the things that we try and do is to identify how we can bridge the gap between the research side and the software engineering side. Now, one way that we do that, and one of the largest sort of success stories of this, has been the creation of RSE groups across the country, taking people who are experts in software engineering and putting them working alongside the experts in the particular scientific fields. And that kind of model of finding people who are experts in that area and putting them together with researchers has spread out from outside just universities. It's in research institutes, it's in hospitals, it's in all sorts of different environments across the UK now. And in fact, it has now spread all across the world. There are chapters of sorts in independent organizations in every continent of the world now. So where the society then comes into this is really to try and create a home to bring together these people and give them somewhere where they can come together and talk about the problems they're facing. Whether that is sort of technical problems or whether it's social problems around how do I get a job doing this, or how do I get promoted into a position where I can have some real control and make effective change in the environment that I'm working in. And so the Society is a charity registered here in the UK. I'm the president of it, and we've got a board of trustees, all volunteer positions. And I think one of the main things that we do during this is the conference, which is sort of what we've been building up to all these years. So back in 2012 was where the idea of a research software engineer was first coined. The first RSE group working at a university, providing that kind of consultancy service to their members sort of as around that same sort of time. And from that point on, we've been running larger and larger events, helping the community in various different ways, right up to recently in the last few years, we've been running an annual mentorship program to give people an understanding of sort of the broader skills outside of just the technical. How can I progress in this field, and what do I need to know in order to become an expert in research and research software engineering more broadly. The conference is obviously one of the big things we do. We've been doing that annually since 2016, except for a little gap due to COVID. And of course, we are running it again this year. As mentioned by Harry, that was where the TRE group first started together. The society itself has been growing number of members, up to about 700 members or so now. But we have a wider community on Slack of about 5,000 members. So if you're working in anything to do with software and anything to do with research, we have a home for you to come and join us completely free. We have a Slack channel, which you can find details of on our website. So in terms of what we actually do on a month-by-month, year-by-year basis, we run the conference, we run workshops to help people put together understanding of how they become leaders in their own fields. We have a podcast which goes out every few weeks or months, depending on which events are happening, Slack channel, mentorship programs, and we have RSE groups across the country. Got a map here of all the different institutes in the UK which have their own group, so do have a look and see if you've got one locally, and if you don't, get in contact with us and we can help you start one. This is our website, societyrsc.org. We are running our annual conference this September, back up in Newcastle, and you're all very, very welcome to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for some really inspiring talks there. If you would like to add some questions, please do add it to the list coming up at the moment. So I will start with a few. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for our panel? Okay, while you're all thinking, I'm going to go from one from online. So this one's specifically to Carole. ELIXIR has genomics and proteomic data for biomedical research. However, I see no relevance to healthcare management. Can you explain how ELIXIR is relevant to HDR UK?
Oh, okay, so that's interesting. So we actually do have a healthcare, health data focus group, which brings in those kind of approaches. And Tim Beck, where are you? In the audience. Yeah, there he is. So Tim is the chair of that focus group. So that is part of that, bringing community in order to be able to bring in that knowledge, as it were. But we've increasingly gone into the areas of health data through European projects, particularly the European Health Data Space and the GDI project, which is Genomic Data Infrastructure Project. So we're moving much more into those areas. We bring particularly technologies. What we're bringing to HDR UK is the technology, interoperability technologies and computational technologies. What HDR UK is bringing is governance and data providers and practices of how TREs really work from the point of view of operation.
Yeah, and I'll just follow on from that as well. I think what we're trying to do is actually learn from these large-scale infrastructures and those large-scale technology ecosystems that ELIXIR has built and apply them into the field of health data in a scale at which we haven't seen before. And so that's why I'd asked Carole to come and give us some lessons learned from that community that we might think through when we are trying to build our own technology ecosystem here. Okay, any questions from the audience, please? Maybe in the middle. Is it a shout out or mic? It's Mike just coming.
Hi, working. My name is Liz Dobson from the IBD Registry. Great talks, thank you everyone. To pick up on a thanks to Carole, I loved your points, particularly about working with the end in mind, coupling, not decoupling, and rewarding reuse, not invention. And then I'm thinking about all our talks about we're building a great infrastructure here, but to adapt a phrase, are the researchers eating the researcher food? How do we get fund? I see so many research-funded applications that have gone through funders, charities, etc., and each researcher's rebuilding their own little micro silo. How can we connect all this stuff we're building here to get the researchers to use it? Do we get AMRC to build it in? Do we get the charities to build it in? How can we encourage reuse rather than invention coming in those funded applications?
Great question.
I can
Yeah,
say something
go for it, Matt.
I think one of the things that you really need to do is to work out who it is who's actually doing that work, who's reinventing things from scratch, and find ways to bring them together and get them drawn to each other. Make sure they're aware of what's going on other places, events like this one, the events that other people here have talked about. Make sure people are talking to each other and sharing the invention of these things from the ground up and building on each other's work. I think the other side of it is making sure that the outcomes of all the work that's done is shared, made open, put online so that people can build on each other's work and not kept in a silo, locked away because it's in some way useful to them, but make sure it's shared as openly and widely as possible.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Harry.
I thought as well. I think there's a big thing around like reuse and reproducibility, which is like system change and like culture change, like a massive level, and that includes everyone. And thinking especially from like that funding perspective, like you're putting in funding calls that are asking for something that might not reflect reproducibility and reusability. At least with TRE UK, what's been great is we set up the community. There was a funding call that went out. We talked to them and said, here's all the stuff we're doing, here's all the benefits to like reuse, collaboration, all that kind of thing. Then a funding call went out to say, there's some funding now available to support groups who are doing this work, like get involved, show us that it's worth it. And it's basically like, if we can prove how useful reuse, reproducibility is to like impact within research, I think it's including funding bodies to be involved in that conversation, to put funding calls together that ask for it, and then you see that system change like slowly start to happen.
Any more questions from the audience, or should we take another one? Simon.
Oh, it's always Simon.
I'm wondering if
He
it's the
always
same
has
as
a
Simon on
question.
here.
Hi, Simon Thompson from Sale Data Bank. I mean, I think building infrastructure is incredibly sexy, but to use Carole's analogy, short of putting lipstick on a pig, how do we convince the funders that this is actually sexy and they should fund it? How do we change their mind?
You're right about the lipstick on the pig. So it's hard because actually I find that it isn't so much the funders that we have to convince, it's the panels we have to convince. So I've seen lots of examples of funding schemes and partnerships with funders, and in fact I'm currently steering a digital research infrastructure that will be funded by UKRI through the machinations of the UK politics. The funders, I think, get it. It's trying to get the community to recognise that some of the funding will have to go away from research and into infrastructure. And that's a big issue because there's a big fear about you're taking things away from the research budget because it's actually a limited budget. Now, we can either expand the budget, which would be great, or we can reposition the budget, which is politically sensitive. And so we have to really onboard the research community and in this case, the clinical researcher community, to recognise the fact if you really want to drive innovation through infrastructure, you need to rebalance some of the funding for it. That's a very hard sell, Simon.
Any other comments on that question?
I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think as well, there's a sort of organisational, I mean, we've already talked about it, right? There's an organisational psychology aspect to this too. And it's a very, very complex situation. And I think we're just really, even though we feel like we've been doing it for years, we're still just at the start. It feels a lot like that. And I think as practices and norms become more established, I think we are going to get better at making the case, but people still don't understand at the moment.
Fantastic.
There's somebody at the end.
Just one more question from the back there.
Thank you very much. Alvin Kotze from Leeds. So at the other end, so we've spoken about infrastructure sharing and reusing research infrastructure and so forth. At the other end, at the translational end, of course, once the research findings come out, they need to be incorporated in software to actually be used.
Yes.
Otherwise, they go in a corner. Yes. Do you think that the research community and the shared infrastructure community also have a responsibility to try and convince the funders to start funding open source tools development for translation? Or is that somebody else's problem?
No, I think that's very much the case. And in fact, there's two, in the software point of view, there's an organisation called the Research Software Alliance, which is very much around forming this kind of unionising around this activity. And every year they have a funders meeting, and where we try to convince funders about how to do sustainable open source development. And its third year is this year, And it's called the ADOR software ADOR software declaration. The ADOR software declaration is this declaration for funders to say they commit to the development of sustainable collaborative software. And it's it's again and has to keep on nudging and nudging and nudging and nudging. Some of the nudges can be quite aggressive, can really push somebody, and some have to be quite subtle. And some of them you have to convince it's their idea, particularly Americans. So it's kind of this combination of nudging activities is going on. So if you're interested in engaging with that, RESA, Research Software Alliance, which I'm delighted to say all these people are involved in.
Well, thank you very, very much for some amazing talks and discussions just now. I think we've learned that we need to put lipstick on pigs.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what we need to do to the chickens that Carole was talking about, but if we can all think about that during the day and come up with a conclusion by the end, that would be fantastic. We now have a coffee break and very much looking forward to seeing you all back for the next sessions. Thank you.